Hey everyone, ready to dive deep into the world of Saving Private Ryan? Released on July 24, 1998, this film has sparked endless discussions, and today, we're uncovering every thrilling detail. If you enjoy this deep dive, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps us grow. And for more incredible movie explorations and hidden gems, subscribe to the channel. Now, let's unravel the magic behind this cinematic masterpiece. When Saving Private Ryan hit theaters in the summer of 1998, it wasn't just another war movie. It was a seismic cultural event. From the very first screening, audiences knew they were witnessing something different. Not a Hollywood-glossed version of battle, but a visceral, unfiltered descent into the chaos of warfare. Director Steven Spielberg, already a legend in the industry, took a sharp turn from his more fantastical adventures and gave us something raw, sobering, and unforgettable. Here was a film that didn't just show World War II, it made you feel it. You could hear it in the gunfire that ripped through your chest, see it in the blood-soaked surf of Omaha Beach, and feel it in the silence that followed every death. This wasn't spectacle, it was history brought to life in the most brutal and human way possible. What sets Saving Private Ryan apart is how personal it feels. It begins not with a bang, but with a quiet, reflective walk through a cemetery. An elderly man, haunted by memories, approaches a grave with trembling hands. His eyes carry the weight of decades. It's a scene loaded with emotion before a single word is spoken. Then, with a flash, we're thrown back in time to June 6, 1944, the D-Day invasion of Normandy, and the screen erupts in a thunderstorm of bullets, smoke, and screams. The next 24 minutes are among the most intense in film history. There's no music, no heroic dialogue, just confusion, terror, and survival. Spielberg and cinematographer Janusz Kaminski crafted a visual language that pulled viewers into the battle itself. Handheld cameras, muted colors, and the now iconic shutter effect that mimics the way our eyes might capture trauma in snapshots. This isn't stylized action, it's a soldier's nightmare. In the middle of the chaos, we meet Captain John Miller, played with understated brilliance by Tom Hanks. Miller is not a war-hardened archetype. He's an everyman, a schoolteacher from Pennsylvania whose steady hands and weary eyes command respect, not through bluster, but through quiet strength. His mission, given by the brass just after the landing, sounds simple on paper but deeply complicated in practice. Find Private James Francis Ryan, a paratrooper whose 3 brothers have all been killed in action, and bring him home before his mother receives a 4th death notice. What unfolds from there isn't just a rescue operation. It's a philosophical inquiry wrapped in a war movie. How do you measure the value of one man's life? What's the cost of sacrifice? And how does duty conflict with humanity? Miller assembles a team of 8 soldiers for the task, and each of them is etched with vivid detail and unique personality. There's Sergeant Horvath, his right-hand man, played with stoic grit by Tom Sizemore. Rybin, the brash Brooklyn soldier constantly questioning the mission, brings raw energy through Edward Burns. Jackson, the sniper with deadly precision and whispered prayers, gives Barry Pepper a role that's become legendary. Giovanni Ribisi's performance as the medic, Wade, is heartbreaking, especially in the quiet moments where he tries to save lives even as he watches them slip away. Vin Diesel surprises as Caparzo, a muscular soldier who shows deep empathy in a doomed effort to save a child. Mellish, portrayed by Adam Goldberg, reveals the inner turmoil of a Jewish-American soldier confronting the horrors of the Nazi regime. And then there's Upham, the inexperienced translator played by Jeremy Davies, whose fear and evolution become one of the film's most devastating arcs. As they move through the French countryside, encountering shattered villages, terrified civilians, and brutal skirmishes, the journey becomes a microcosm of war itself. They find Private Ryan, played by Matt Damon, in the rubble of Ramelle, unwilling to abandon his post or his brothers in arms. His defiance is admirable, infuriating, and profoundly human. He doesn't want to be saved at the expense of others. What follows is a breathtaking final act where the squad defends a key bridge against a German offensive in a battle that's as suspenseful as it is tragic. The climactic fight isn't about victory. It's about holding ground, buying time, and honoring the dead. Captain Miller dies in this fight, whispering 2 words to Ryan, "Earn this." It's not just a passing of the torch. It's a command, a plea, a burden. Those words linger long after the film ends. They become a moral compass not just for Ryan, but for every viewer. Have we earned the lives sacrificed for us? Have we lived well enough to justify their deaths? It's a question with no easy answer, and it's one of the many reasons Saving Private Ryan transcends its genre. What makes this movie extraordinary isn't just its realism, it's its emotional resonance. Spielberg's direction is surgical in how it balances spectacle with soul. The action scenes are intense, yes, but they're never gratuitous. Each explosion, each death is tied to a character we care about, a story thread we've followed. The film earns every tear, every gasp. And John Williams, usually known for sweeping orchestral themes, keeps the score subdued here, haunting and reverent rather than grandiose, allowing the silence between gunshots to say as much as the music ever could. The performances ground the story in humanity. Hanks, as always, brings unmatched relatability. Damon's youthful earnestness is the perfect counterweight to the older, wearier soldiers. The ensemble, many of whom were lesser known at the time, disappeared into their roles, creating a believable brotherhood that made their losses feel personal. Spielberg famously had the cast go through military boot camp to forge this camaraderie and discomfort, a tactic that paid off in every grimy, sweat-soaked frame. Then there's the cultural impact. This wasn't just a movie, it was a phenomenon. Veterans, especially those who fought in World War II, praised the film's brutal honesty. Many claimed it was the closest thing to actually being there. Others found it too real, too painful to revisit. It reopened national conversations about the war, about memory, about how we honor our fallen. It influenced a generation of filmmakers, inspired video games, documentaries, and even educational programs. It redefined what a war movie could be, not just action-packed, but spiritually wrenching. Despite winning 5 Academy Awards, including Best Director, it famously lost Best Picture to Shakespeare in Love, a decision that remains one of the most controversial in Oscar history. But awards aren't what cement a legacy. Impact does. Rewatchability does. Emotional truth does. And Saving Private Ryan has all of those in abundance. There's a reason audiences continue to discover and rewatch it decades later. It's not just about war, it's about what war does to the soul. It's about the cost of peace, the price of freedom, and the weight of memory. It's about the men who didn't come home and the ones who did, trying to make sense of why. Spielberg doesn't offer easy answers. He doesn't glorify violence. He demands that we sit with it, understand it, and carry its lessons forward. In the end, when we return to that cemetery and Ryan, now an old man, falls to his knees at Captain Miller's grave, asking if he's been a good man, if he's lived a life worthy of their sacrifice, it's not just a moment of closure. It's an echo, a call to all of us to remember the past, to honor those who served, and to ask ourselves if we are earning the peace they fought for. Saving Private Ryan is more than a movie. It's a memory, a warning, a tribute, and a challenge. It stands as one of cinema's most powerful testaments to the complexity of heroism and the enduring cost of war. And once you've seen it, truly seen it, you'll never look at the idea of sacrifice the same way again. The screen opens not with noise, but with silence. A quiet walk through a sunlit cemetery, white crosses stretching endlessly across a manicured lawn, speaks louder than any dialogue could. An older man, flanked by his family, walks forward with visible reverence, his face shadowed by the weight of something unspoken. His steps slow as he nears one particular grave, and suddenly, time dissolves. What follows next is not merely a flashback. It's a plunge into a moment in history so immersive, so violently real, it leaves no room for breath. On June 6, 1944, the American assault on Omaha Beach begins, and with it, the audience is pulled into the roaring chaos of D-Day. The landing sequence doesn't ease us in. It throws us into the cold surf of Normandy with Captain John Miller and his men. As the ramp of the landing craft drops, gunfire explodes in every direction. Soldiers fall before they even reach the water. The air is thick with screams, shouts, and the sharp, jarring crack of machine guns. Limbs are lost. Friends are killed before names can even be remembered. Spielberg doesn't let you look away. The camera shakes with every impact, water and blood cloud every frame, and you can feel the panic, the disorientation, the utter desperation. It is not heroism, it is survival. Amidst this storm of metal and flesh, we find Captain John Miller, played by Tom Hanks with the quiet precision of a man who carries too much but reveals too little. Miller is a stabilizing presence. His hand shakes, a detail that never goes unnoticed, but he doesn't falter. He gives orders calmly, guiding his men forward inch by inch. They breach the beach, clear the bunkers, and take the high ground, but the victory is hollow. The sand is littered with bodies, and the cost of every inch is palpable. Back home, in the hushed offices of the U.S. War Department, a clerk makes a startling discovery. 3 brothers of the same family, Daniel, Sean, and Peter Ryan, have been killed in action in different locations across the warfront. Their mother, Mrs. Ryan, is about to receive all 3 death notices at once. But there's a 4th son, James Francis Ryan, a paratrooper who dropped into Normandy and whose fate is still uncertain. The Chief of Staff reads a moving letter from Abraham Lincoln, written to a mother who had lost 5 sons in the Civil War, and decides that no mother should endure such loss again. He orders a rescue mission. Send a team to find Private Ryan and bring him home. The task falls to Captain Miller and a hand-picked squad of 8 men. It's an unusual mission, and that oddity is not lost on the team. These men aren't told why at first, only that they're heading behind enemy lines to retrieve 1 soldier. There's immediate tension. Miller's team is already weathered from battle, and now they're risking their lives for someone they've never met, for a mission that feels more symbolic than strategic. Each member of Miller's squad brings something unique to the group, not just in skill but in personality. Sergeant Horvath, played by Tom Sizemore, is Miller's right hand, gruff and dependable, a man who's seen too much but remains grounded. Private Rybin, the sharp-tongued New Yorker played by Edward Burns, is the first to voice dissent. He doesn't hide his skepticism. Why risk 8 men for 1? Then there's Wade, the soft-spoken medic portrayed by Giovanni Ribisi, who carries the heaviest burden of all, deciding who lives and dies. Barry Peppers Jackson is a sniper who kills with terrifying precision while murmuring scripture under his breath. Caparzo, played by a young and empathetic Vin Diesel, is the brawn with a surprising heart. Mellish, played by Adam Goldberg, is volatile and deeply affected by the anti-Semitism of the enemy. And finally, there's Corporal Upham, played by Jeremy Davies, a translator and mapmaker pulled from the sidelines into the heart of battle, untested and unready, representing the innocence that war obliterates. Their journey begins with a grim determination but quickly spirals into the unpredictable mess that defines war. The squad moves through war-ravaged villages, dodging sniper fire and booby traps, following secondhand intel and half-heard rumors. Every step forward is one of risk, and that risk quickly becomes real when they encounter a German machine gun nest. It's a pivotal moment in the story, and one that reshapes the group dynamic. Miller decides to take the position, despite Rybin's protests that it's not part of their mission. The fight is brutal and fast. Caparzo is killed earlier, shot by a sniper while trying to help a young French girl, his compassion becoming his downfall. In this ambush, Wade, the medic, is mortally wounded. The scene that follows is one of the most emotionally devastating in the film. Wade's team tries desperately to save him, to stop the bleeding, but it's futile. His death is slow and agonizing, filled with whispered regrets and helplessness. For a moment, war strips away its larger strategy and reveals its most personal cost. This loss fractures the group. Rybin lashes out, furious that they're dying for a cause they don't even understand. He threatens to leave. The tension explodes. Guns are drawn. Everything they've built together threatens to unravel, until Miller, in a moment of stunning vulnerability, reveals who he really is. "I'm a schoolteacher," he says. The confession is simple but profound. This man, who has led them through death and destruction, who they see as a hardened soldier, is just someone who taught English composition. The admission humanizes him, and in doing so, brings the group back from the edge. But their trials are far from over. As they continue the search for Ryan, they meet other units, sift through confusion, and find dead ends. Literally. At one point, they even come across a Private James Ryan from Minnesota, only to realize they've got the wrong man. The moment is laced with dark humor and heavy irony, as the tension of the mission presses down harder with every misstep. Eventually, they stumble upon a group of paratroopers defending a critical bridge in the town of Ramel. Here, finally, they find the real James Francis Ryan. And what does he say when told that all this effort has been made to bring him home? "I can't leave," he says. It's a moment of defiance that mirrors Miller's integrity. Ryan refuses to abandon his post, his comrades. He's not just a mission. He's a soldier, bound by duty. That choice plants the seeds for the second half of the film, where the mission shifts from extraction to defense. But by this point, the audience understands that the story has never been about just finding Ryan. It's about the people who got him there, the cost, the lives lost along the way, the beliefs tested, and the reality that war doesn't give answers, only consequences. The first half of Saving Private Ryan operates as both a thrilling war epic and a slow-burn character study. Spielberg takes his time, building tension not just through action, but through silence, through glances, through what goes unsaid. We see the early fractures in the group, the emotional weight each man carries, and how those burdens begin to shift as they understand the deeper meaning of their journey. Every death isn't just another casualty. It's a question mark left behind. Was it worth it? The film's visual style reinforces this psychological realism. Gritty textures, handheld shots, desaturated colors. Every frame is designed to blur the line between fiction and memory. The characters are not Hollywood soldiers. They're tired, dirty, scared, and flawed. The brilliance lies in how Spielberg and his team allow moments of humanity to exist in the cracks of brutality. The way Caparzo jokes before being shot. The tenderness in Wade's final words. The boiling rage in Rybin's voice. The emptiness in Upham's eyes as he realizes that knowledge won't protect him from death. And through it all, Tom Hanks remains the center of gravity. His portrayal of Captain Miller is subdued but magnetic. We don't know everything about him, but we understand him. We feel the weight he carries with every order. We see the toll each death takes on his soul. He's a man trying to complete a mission that doesn't make sense on paper, but whose deeper logic begins to reveal itself in quiet moments. When a squad becomes a family, when sacrifice reveals purpose. As the first half of Saving Private Ryan draws to a close, it does so not with triumphant music or a banner of success, but with uncertainty. The mission has technically succeeded, Ryan has been found, but the cost has already been steep. And with the enemy closing in, the promise of a safe return feels more fragile than ever. The film doesn't let up. It doesn't offer comfort. It asks us to sit in the discomfort, to feel the weight of loss, and to question the value of one man's life against the lives already lost. This isn't just the setup for a climactic final battle. It's the emotional crucible where every belief, every bond, and every breath of hope will be tested. And as we move forward into the storm that lies ahead, we do so knowing that nothing will be the same again. As the second half of Saving Private Ryan begins, the tone shifts, yet the tension never fades. Captain Miller and his remaining squad members have finally found Private James Francis Ryan in the bombed-out remains of Ramel, a small French town nestled around a strategically vital bridge. But what should be a moment of resolution quickly morphs into another conflict. Ryan refuses to leave. The young paratrooper, played by Matt Damon, is stunned to learn that his brothers are dead, that a team was sent across enemy territory to bring him home, and that men have already died in the process. But instead of gratitude or relief, Ryan responds with defiance. He won't abandon his unit. His fellow soldiers are preparing to defend the bridge against a major German advance, and Ryan insists on staying to fight. The moment lands with emotional gravity. It reframes the mission entirely, not as a rescue but as a choice. For Miller and his men, it's another bitter reality of war. Nothing goes as planned, and people, especially soldiers, rarely fit into the roles assigned to them. They could force Ryan to leave, but doing so would destroy the fragile trust they've built. And so, Despite the odds and the overwhelming fatigue in their bones, Miller decides they'll stay and help defend the bridge. What follows is a quiet interlude, but one loaded with meaning. The soldiers prepare for the coming battle with scraps and whatever munitions they can find. They rig explosives, study the terrain, and plan ambushes. There's a sense of resolve in the air, a momentary calm before the storm, and it's in this sliver of time that we get one last chance to sit with these characters before chaos takes them. Miller opens up more than ever before. He tells Ryan and the others about his life back home, his wife's garden, the classes he used to teach. He does it not to inspire courage, but to remember who he is, who he was before the war. These are the final breaths of humanity before violence drowns it all out again. Then the sky darkens. The ground trembles. The enemy arrives. The battle for Rommel explodes into action with a roar of tank engines and the metallic rattle of machine guns. It's a masterclass in tension and choreography. German forces push across the bridge, their armored columns flanked by waves of infantry. Miller's squad, along with Ryan and the paratroopers, unleash their makeshift ambush. The fighting is brutal and immediate. Bullets fly, grenades explode, the deafening thunder of tanks drowns out thought. But this isn't the stylized heroism of a traditional war movie. This is desperate, improvised resistance. One by one, the men we've come to know begin to fall. Mellish is killed in one of the most harrowing moments of the film. A slow, intimate struggle with a German soldier that ends with a knife pressed deep into his chest. It's a death that unfolds in agonizing silence, a reminder of how personal and terrifying close-quarters combat can be. Upstairs, Corporal Upham cowers, paralyzed by fear, unable to help. The moment is heart-wrenching, not because Upham is weak, but because fear is real, human, and overwhelming. War doesn't allow for perfect courage. It exposes the fragility of bravery. Sergeant Horvath, the loyal second-in-command, goes down trying to hold the line. Ribon and Jackson fight with relentless fury, with Jackson climbing the bell tower to snipe from above, taking out enemy after enemy until a tank shell ends his life in an instant. The losses are fast and shattering. And then there's Captain Miller. Wounded and bleeding, he drags himself toward the detonator, trying to blow the bridge to halt the enemy's advance. A German tank lumbers closer, its barrel pointed directly at him. And just when it seems all is lost, when defeat feels imminent, an American P-51 Mustang screeches overhead and fires on the tank, destroying it in a fiery explosion. Reinforcements have finally arrived. But for Miller, it's too late. Mortally wounded, he slumps against the twisted metal of the bridge. Private Ryan kneels beside him. With his final breath, Miller doesn't give a speech, doesn't offer grand last words. Just two simple, haunting ones: "Earn this." And with that, he's gone. Those words are more than a farewell. They're a command, a burden, a legacy passed on not just to Ryan, but to every person who survived. Earn this echoes through time, reverberating in the conscience of a man who now has to live with the knowledge that others died so he could go home. Spielberg doesn't frame it as glorious or triumphant. It's weighty, it's ambiguous, and it's real. The war ends, but the film doesn't cut to black. We return, decades later, to the Normandy cemetery from the opening scene. Now, we know the man standing at Miller's grave is James Ryan. His face is etched with age, but his eyes still carry the burden of that moment. Kneeling before the cross, he turns to his wife and asks a question that has haunted him for a lifetime. Am I a good man? It's not a rhetorical question. It's a cry for absolution. Has he lived a life worthy of the sacrifices made for him? The film offers no definitive answer. It doesn't need to. The power lies in the question itself. In that final moment, Saving Private Ryan ties every narrative thread together. The mission wasn't just about Ryan, it was about meaning. It was about identity. About the soul of a man named John Miller who once taught English composition and died on a bridge far from home. It was about a squad of soldiers who didn't ask for glory, but who found purpose in an impossible task. It was about the price of one life and the cost of preserving it. Every scene, every decision, and every sacrifice culminates here. Spielberg crafts a mosaic of emotion and memory, where even the smallest gestures, Reiben's sarcasm, Upham's fear, Wade's quiet dedication, become fragments of a greater whole. War, as shown in this film, is not about victory. It's about loss, transformation, and the quiet, unspeakable hope that maybe, just maybe, something good can grow from the ashes. One of the final images is of the American flag fluttering in the wind, not triumphant, but reverent. It's a closing shot that asks us to remember, not just the names carved into stone, but the people behind them, their stories, their pain, their choices. Spielberg's direction ensures we carry these moments with us. He doesn't manipulate emotion, he earns it. Every death matters. Every beat is part of a larger symphony of grief and resolve. John Williams' score, subdued and aching, never overwhelms the imagery. It follows the story like a distant memory, pulling emotion from silence rather than bombast. Upham's arc becomes one of quiet redemption. After cowering in the stairwell as Mellish died, he confronts the same German soldier later, one they had earlier released in a gesture of mercy, and this time he does not flinch. He captures the enemy soldiers who killed his friends and executes the man who betrayed their mercy. It's a chilling moment, one that shows how war can harden even the softest souls. Upham, once the symbol of innocence, is now part of the unspoken truth that in war, morality is rarely clear-cut. The bridge becomes a metaphor for everything the film is trying to say. It's a crossing point between youth and adulthood, between duty and despair, between life and legacy. And in defending it, the soldiers didn't just stop the enemy. They created a moment that would echo across time. The cost was immense, but the meaning, if it can be earned, remains. Saving Private Ryan doesn't just depict war. It deconstructs it. It exposes it. It mourns it. The second half of the film, heavy with sacrifice and revelation, doesn't close with resolution but with reflection. That's why the film endures, not because it provides easy answers, but because it dares to ask the hardest questions. And in doing so, it leaves a mark that no amount of time can erase. At the heart of Saving Private Ryan lies a portrait of humanity under unimaginable pressure, and it's through its characters, not just the spectacle of war, that the film burns its memory into our minds. These aren't faceless soldiers or symbols of valor. They're men with doubts, dreams, flaws, and burdens, rendered unforgettable by performances that pierce through the chaos and leave a lasting emotional imprint. We begin with Captain John H. Miller, played with haunting restraint and quiet authority by Tom Hanks. He enters the film as a mystery. The men under his command take bets on what he did before the war because he never says. He's calm, composed, decisive, but distant. A leader they trust, but don't quite know. That ambiguity is purposeful. Spielberg allows Miller to be a canvas for us to project onto until, piece by piece, the man beneath the uniform is revealed. We come to learn that Miller was a high school English teacher from Pennsylvania, a husband, a baseball coach, just a man, soft-spoken, intelligent, maybe a little shy, who was thrown into a war that demands brutality from those least equipped to give it. And yet he leads, not because he seeks glory, but because someone has to carry the weight. Hanks plays Miller with a kind of exhausted grace, a man constantly suppressing his fear and grief just to keep everyone else moving forward. Every line he delivers feels carefully weighed, as though he's measuring how much of himself he can afford to show without falling apart. His arc is not one of transformation but revelation. We don't see him change as much as we finally understand him. And by the time he mutters "earn this," we see the full shape of a man who gave everything for a principle he could barely articulate, a belief that one life, well lived, could justify so much loss. Private James Francis Ryan, portrayed by Matt Damon, doesn't appear until late in the film, but his presence looms large from the moment the mission is set in motion. He is, in many ways, more symbol than man at first, a name on a list, a justification for a dangerous journey. When we finally meet him, he doesn't fall into the role we expect. He doesn't plead to be rescued. He doesn't crumble in awe at the sacrifice others have made for him. Instead, he's defiant, loyal, stubborn. Damon gives Ryan a rough-edged youthfulness, a blend of pride and guilt that complicates what could have been a one-dimensional character. Ryan's refusal to abandon his post isn't just brave. It's also a reflection of how he views his brothers. If they died fighting, how could he live by running? That tension between duty to his country and duty to his family is what defines him. In the end, he is changed by the sacrifice made for him, but also shaped by his refusal to be passive in the face of it. He becomes not a victim of war, but an inheritor of its weight. Around Miller and Ryan revolve a collection of men who together form a fractured, authentic portrait of a platoon, each one etched with their own inner life. Sergeant Mike Horvath, played by Tom Sizemore, is the steadfast backbone of the squad. A veteran soldier who's seen too much, Horvath doesn't seek control, but he supports Miller unflinchingly, serving as a moral compass and emotional anchor. Sizemore plays him with rugged weariness and quiet devotion. He's the kind of man who's been holding it together for so long that the cracks only show when no one's watching. There's a moment when he tells Miller that the mission must mean something because if it doesn't, none of this makes sense anymore. That line encapsulates Horvath's quiet desperation. He needs the mission to matter not because he believes in orders, but because he's losing faith in everything else. Private Richard Ribon, brought to life with fierce intensity by Edward Burns, is the skeptic, the voice of the audience, the man who isn't afraid to question orders or point out the absurdity of risking 8 lives for one. Burns brings a raw edge to Ribon, a blend of Bronx bravado and buried vulnerability. He challenges Miller, but not out of insubordination, out of fear, anger, and a sense of injustice. His arc is one of reluctant trust. Over the course of the film, Ribon shifts from cynic to believer. Not in the mission, necessarily, but in the men beside him. His respect for Miller doesn't come from rank. It comes from watching a man lead with integrity despite the burden. By the end, Ribon is one of the last men standing, and you can feel the weight of that irony settle on his shoulders like a second uniform. Then there's Private Jackson, the Southern sniper with a Bible verse on his lips and a rifle in his hands. Barry Pepper crafts Jackson as a study in contrasts, devout, poetic, yet lethal. His ability to kill is unmatched, yet he sees it as a divine task, an extension of his belief in justice and purpose. He's not a sociopath, he's deeply spiritual. That duality makes him both unsettling and deeply human. When he meets his end in the bell tower, his death is sudden and violent, without warning or ceremony. There's no final prayer, no divine intervention, just the cold randomness of war. Corporal Upham is perhaps the most heartbreaking character in the film. Jeremy Davies imbues him with nervous energy, a kind of intellectual fragility that feels out of place in a war zone. A translator, not a fighter, Upham is the newcomer, idealistic, inexperienced, and utterly unprepared for the violence around him. He wants to believe in the rules of war, in honor and morality, but the world around him relentlessly dismantles those beliefs. One of the film's most crushing scenes involves Upham watching, paralyzed, as Mellish is murdered just feet away. Davies doesn't overplay the fear. He lets it sit, quiet, suffocating, real. And later, when Upham kills the German soldier he once helped spare, it's not triumph, it's tragedy. That act isn't redemption, it's transformation. War has finally changed him, stripped him of his innocence, and left something colder in its place. Private Wade, the medic played with soft-spoken sensitivity by Giovanni Ribisi, offers a different kind of courage. He's not there to fight, he's there to save lives. But in this war, the job of a medic is a cruel one. Wade's scenes are some of the most emotionally raw in the film, particularly the one where he tries desperately to save a wounded soldier under fire. Ribisi gives Wade a tender soul, one who carries every death like a personal failure. In a quiet moment, he speaks about his mother and the regret of not talking to her before leaving. That scene, simple as it is, cuts deeper than any explosion. It's a reminder that every soldier is someone's child, that every war story is also a family's loss. Then there's Mellish, played with gut-wrenching humanity by Adam Goldberg. Loud, brash, and often comic, Mellish brings levity to the group. But beneath the sarcasm is a man who deeply fears the world he's in. His final scene, fighting for his life in a slow, painful duel, is one of the most disturbing in the film. It strips away the distance of gunfights and gives us a view of death that is agonizingly intimate. Goldberg's performance in that moment is unforgettable not because of how he dies, but because of how desperately he wants to live. These characters don't exist in isolation. They reflect and refract each other. Miller's restraint highlights Riben's fire. Jackson's faith contrasts with Upham's doubt. Wade's compassion stands in relief against the cruelty of their enemies. Spielberg weaves their arcs together like threads in a tapestry, creating a portrait of wartime brotherhood that is as cohesive as it is tragic. The supporting characters, those who flicker in and out of the story, also carry immense weight. The grizzled colonel who approves the mission, the German prisoner known as Steamboat Willie, even the civilians caught in the crossfire. Each plays a role in shaping the moral landscape. Steamboat Willie, in particular, becomes a lightning rod for ethical conflict. When the squad spares his life early on, it seems like a mercy. But when he returns later, as part of the force that kills Miller, that decision becomes a haunting lesson in consequence. It's not about whether it was right or wrong. It's about the fact that in war, even the right choice can cost you everything. What elevates these characters beyond cliché or archetype is the film's refusal to simplify them. No one is wholly brave or wholly broken. They each carry contradictions, hope and fear, rage and tenderness. The performances reflect that complexity with an honesty that refuses to flinch. Spielberg doesn't ask these actors to perform heroism. He asks them to show humanity. The result is a film populated by ghosts that feel real, men whose stories could belong to anyone's father, brother, or son. In Saving Private Ryan, character is not a function of plot. It is the plot. Every decision, every death, every moment of silence is shaped by the internal world of these men. Their motivations, whether it's Miller's sense of duty, Horvath's loyalty, Riben's skepticism, or Upham's fear, drive the story forward more than any battle plan or objective. They don't fight because they're soldiers. They fight because they're people trying to survive in a world that no longer makes sense. And when the final shots fade, it's their faces we remember. Not just because of what they did, but because of who they were and who they might have been if not for war. Would you like to move on to the final part, cinematic themes and legacy next? For a film as thunderously real as Saving Private Ryan, what happened off-screen was nearly as intense, surreal, and transformative as what made it onto celluloid. Behind every grainy shot of chaos, every trembling close-up, there was a cast and crew living a kind of parallel war. Not with bullets and blood, but with brutal conditions, overwhelming responsibility, and the unshakable drive to tell the story with honesty. The strange odyssey begins with the first 27 minutes of the film, the legendary Omaha Beach landing sequence. It's the cinematic equivalent of a gut punch, a visceral assault of sound, fury, and disorientation. But what makes it even more shocking is that Spielberg chose not to storyboard it. That's right, no drawn-out previsualization, no rigid shot list. Instead, he brought handheld cameras onto the beach and gave his operators freedom, telling them to react like war photographers, not cinematographers. The chaos you feel? It's real because it was chaotic on set too. Spielberg wanted the camera to feel like another soldier, jolted, shoved, knocked over, bleeding light and sound. To achieve that rawness, Spielberg and cinematographer Janusz Kaminski used bleach bypass processing, which strips away some of the color and gives everything a gritty, washed-out feel. It's not flashy, it's harsh. The film stock used was deliberately grainy. The camera often shuttered at a higher speed than normal to give motion an unnerving, staccato quality. You feel every tremble, every twitch. There's no beauty in the violence, just survival. And that was the goal. But the strangest and most emotionally scarring aspect of the production wasn't the technical challenge. It was the psychological one. Before filming even began, Spielberg made the principal cast undergo a 10-day military boot camp led by Dale Dye, a Marine Corps veteran who served in Vietnam. Dye didn't just teach them how to handle weapons or march in formation. He broke them down. They slept on the ground, lived off MREs, were yelled at, physically exhausted, mentally stripped of comfort. Tom Hanks later said it wasn't the physical hardship that hurt, it was the isolation. Spielberg deliberately kept Matt Damon out of the training so the rest of the cast would harbor genuine resentment toward him once they met on screen. It worked. That tinge of emotional distance you feel when they first find Ryan? That was real-life tension born out of a psychological experiment. Even the location of the landing scene carries a strange twist. It wasn't shot in Normandy at all, but on Ballinesker Beach in County Wexford, Ireland. The French government wouldn't allow such a destructive scene to be filmed on the real Omaha beach. Ireland, however, welcomed the production, and Spielberg turned the sleepy beach into a war zone with painstaking authenticity. Over 1,500 extras, many of them Irish Army Reserve soldiers, were dressed in period uniforms. The makeup team created hundreds of prosthetic limbs and wounds. Dozens of amputee actors were used to show realistic battlefield injuries. In some shots, limbs fly across the frame, and those aren't just rubber props. They're attached to actors with green screen sleeves that were digitally erased in post. And then there's the blood. So much of it. But it wasn't just for shock. It was for truth. The production team consulted real veterans and medical experts to ensure the injuries were accurate in type, severity, and location. When a soldier screams for his mother while trying to shove his intestines back into his stomach, it's not sensationalism. It's a documented reality of that battle. Spielberg refused to shy away from the horror. There's no triumphant music swelling in the background. Just water, screaming, and the mechanical hiss of death. Speaking of the sound, another fascinating layer. The sound design in Saving Private Ryan is a masterpiece of disorientation. Spielberg and sound designer Gary Ridstrom manipulated sound to reflect the chaos of battle. When Miller's ears ring after an explosion, it's not just a cinematic flourish. It's exactly what would happen to a real soldier caught in a blast. Ridstrom consulted doctors and combat veterans to get the tone and duration of that tinnitus effect right. Throughout the film, sounds are often muffled, directionless, overwhelming. It's not a mistake. It's meant to put you there, in the storm. One of the strangest production accidents happened during the filming of the bridge sequence at the end of the film. As explosions rocked the set, a nearby building's windows shattered unexpectedly, raining glass over the area. Nobody was hurt, but it added another layer of tension to a shoot that was already frayed with nerves. That final battle was filmed in the Czech Republic, in a partially destroyed town called Hayton, which was further demolished and rebuilt to resemble war-torn Ramel. The production spent weeks turning it into rubble and flooding it with mud, water, and blood. The bridge itself, built entirely for the film, then blown apart. Tom Hanks, as the emotional core of the movie, carried his own strange burden. In interviews, he admitted that the shoot took a psychic toll on him. Between takes, the cast would often sit in silence, not joking, not socializing, just processing. Spielberg had to take breaks from watching dailies because the footage was too emotionally draining. The line, "Earn this," was one of the last things written, added near the end of production. It was meant to encapsulate the impossible burden of survival, something that Spielberg had heard from Holocaust survivors. That survivor's guilt, that need to justify why you lived when others died, became the film's quiet thesis. Even more strangely, after screenings of the film, many real D-Day veterans had to leave the theater early or watch in silence, shaken. The Department of Veterans Affairs in the U.S. received thousands of calls from former soldiers dealing with PTSD flare-ups triggered by the film. One veteran said it was the first time he felt like someone understood what he went through. Another said he finally cried about the war for the first time in 50 years. Spielberg didn't just make a movie. He reopened a wound and let light into it. Matt Damon's casting also came with a strange ripple. At the time, he was a relatively unknown actor, which is exactly why Spielberg picked him. He wanted the audience to meet Private Ryan as a blank slate, not as a celebrity. Ironically, Good Will Hunting came out before Saving Private Ryan hit theaters, and suddenly Damon was a star. But Spielberg kept him in the role, trusting that the emotional architecture of the film would still work. It did. There's also an eerie real-life parallel. Tom Hanks' character, Captain Miller, is fictional. but he represents thousands of real officers who fought and died without fame or recognition. And Tom Hanks himself would later become deeply involved with veterans' causes, producing Band of Brothers and the Pacific, and using his platform to promote World War II remembrance. For him, the line between role and responsibility blurred. Spielberg, too, would go on to co-found the National World War II Museum and contribute to numerous veteran support efforts. And if we're talking about legacy, here's an unexpected twist. Despite being nominated for 11 Academy Awards and widely considered the best film of 1998, Saving Private Ryan lost Best Picture to Shakespeare in Love. That decision sparked controversy that still lingers today. Many consider it one of the greatest Oscar upsets of all time. Even Academy members later admitted that the political maneuvering behind the scenes, especially by Harvey Weinstein's aggressive campaigning for Shakespeare in Love, skewed the outcome. But Spielberg did win Best Director, and the film's impact eclipsed the awards. Another odd moment came from military historians who found a factual inconsistency in the film. The radar dish used in one scene didn't exist in 1944. When told about it, Spielberg reportedly laughed and said he'd take the criticism, if that's the only mistake they found in a film packed with so much detail. And he wasn't wrong. Uniforms were hand-stitched to match 1940s fabric. Helmets were dented and repainted to reflect months of combat wear. Even the dirt was researched. Samples from Normandy were analyzed so the Irish beach could be matched in texture and color. Then there's the musical score, or more accurately, the restraint of it. John Williams composed a powerful, mournful score, but Spielberg made the bold decision to omit music from the battle scenes entirely. No sweeping violins, no orchestral adrenaline. Just gunfire, screaming, and silence. That choice creates a sense of documentary realism, stripping away any hint of dramatization. When the score finally does come in, it's not to elevate the violence, it's to honor the sacrifice. And in one of the film's most bizarre and haunting callbacks, the final cemetery scene features a man, older Ryan, breaking down in tears at the graves of his saviors. But those tears weren't just acting. The weight of the moment, the sheer magnitude of standing among thousands of graves at the Normandy American Cemetery, overwhelmed actor Harrison Young. His trembling voice, his collapse to his knees, it wasn't just performance. It was something closer to truth, seeping in from the edges of fiction. Saving Private Ryan may be one of the most meticulously crafted war films ever made, but its power doesn't come from the accuracy of its weapons or the scale of its explosions. It comes from the strange alchemy of fact and feeling, of artists and veterans, of memory and myth. Every behind-the-scenes choice, from casting and camera angles to emotional manipulation and real-life consultation, was designed not to impress, but to devastate. To remind us that behind every flag is a folded letter, behind every name etched in stone is a story, and sometimes, the story behind the story is just as staggering as what unfolds on screen. Before a single frame of Saving Private Ryan was captured, Steven Spielberg had already made a decision that would define the soul of the film. This wouldn't be just a movie about World War II. This would be a resurrection. Not in the mythic sense, but in the brutal, tactile, sweat-soaked reality of it. And to achieve that, Spielberg knew he had to do something that hadn't been done before. He had to make the audience feel like they were there, not watching history, but living it. Principal photography began on June 27, 1997, and it was from day one that Spielberg set the tone for what the cast and crew would endure. Filming the harrowing Omaha beach sequence first wasn't just a creative choice, it was psychological. Spielberg wanted his actors to start with trauma, to form their bonds not through rehearsals, but through chaos, exhaustion, and simulated terror. The cast, Tom Hanks, Barry Pepper, Adam Goldberg, Giovanni Ribisi, and others, weren't eased into their roles. They were thrown into hell. The beach landing sequence, which dominates the first 27 minutes of the film, was shot in Ireland, not Normandy, due to environmental and bureaucratic constraints. Ballinesker Beach in County Wexford became the stand-in for Omaha, and it wasn't merely decorated. It was transformed. Hundreds of feet of trench were dug, period-accurate check hedgehogs and tank traps were installed, and over 1,500 extras, many of them Irish Army reservists, were trained to move and react like real World War II soldiers. Each extra had a specific backstory, a role, a place to die, and a reason to be there. This wasn't window dressing. It was orchestrated chaos. Spielberg, always meticulous, worked closely with cinematographer Janusz Kaminski to strip the film of any Hollywood polish. They devised a visual language meant to mimic war photography from the 1940s. The film stock was manipulated, overexposed in processing, and desaturated to dull the colors. The shutter angle was narrowed to 45 degrees, far from the standard 180, giving movements a staccato, harsh quality. This meant that explosions didn't just light up the screen, they snapped like lightning. Gunfire felt violent and jarring, not choreographed. You didn't just see bullets fly, you felt them tear through the frame. Spielberg didn't want traditional camera setups. He wanted the audience in the trenches, in the surf, behind the sandbags. Most of the beach scenes were filmed with handheld cameras, operated on the fly, often by war photographers turned cinematographers. Some shots even had protective gear over the lenses to keep flying debris and water from ruining the film, a practical necessity that ended up enhancing the realism. It created a kind of grime on the lens that made the action feel even more immediate, more desperate. And the sound, my God, the sound. Sound designer Gary Ridstrom crafted the audio landscape like a battlefield symphony. Bullets weren't just sound effects, they were spatial events. The moment where a mortar explodes near Captain Miller and everything goes silent except for a muffled ringing was a direct replication of real-life accounts from veterans. That temporary deafness, that sense of disorientation wasn't invented for drama, it was reported by hundreds of soldiers. Spielberg wanted us to hear what they heard, to feel that moment of terror when the world fades into a fog of noise and pain. The uniforms, weapons, and props were obsessively researched. The costume department aged every garment with precise techniques to match the wear and tear of weeks in battle. Soldiers' boots were soaked and sun-dried repeatedly. Helmets were dented and painted by hand. Even the dog tags were stamped using original World War II machines. The attention to detail was so extreme that some actors forgot they were in costume. It all felt too real. But the realism didn't end with costumes. Before filming began, the core cast underwent a 10-day military boot camp led by retired U.S. Marine Captain Dale Dye. And this wasn't just light training. It was a full immersion. The actors were stripped of their celebrity status, given numbers instead of names, forced to hike miles in rain and mud, to sleep in foxholes, to eat rations, and to suffer. Tom Hanks, the de facto leader of the squad, was drilled with the expectation that he'd command respect, and he did. By the end, the actors weren't just playing soldiers. They felt like soldiers. They moved like them. They communicated with gestures and eye contact. The pain of fatigue, the soreness in their bodies, the ache in their feet. All of it was real. Spielberg himself didn't participate in the boot camp. Not because he didn't respect the process, but because he wanted to keep his perspective as the observer, the storyteller. He needed to be the one witnessing this brotherhood form in real time so that he could translate it truthfully to the screen. Even the decision to make the enemy faceless for most of the film wasn't random. It was intentional. Spielberg wanted the German forces to feel like a looming threat, not a group of individuals with backstories or motivations. Except for one or two scenes, we rarely see the enemy clearly. This gave the battles a terrifying ambiguity. You never knew where danger might come from. It was omnipresent, unseen, like death itself. One of the most technically daring choices Spielberg made was to avoid storyboarding most of the action. Unlike many directors who meticulously plan every shot, Spielberg preferred spontaneity on the battlefield. He knew that real combat was unpredictable, so he would often rehearse with the actors and then let the cameras roll, following the action organically. The result was footage that felt urgent, unplanned, and alive. Nothing was clean. Nothing was precise. And that made everything feel true. There were, of course, logistical nightmares. The beach scenes alone took over a month to film. The weather changed constantly. The sea was unpredictable. Equipment malfunctioned. Extras got injured. But Spielberg insisted on pushing through because he believed that the discomfort would translate into authenticity. And it did. You can see it in the eyes of the actors, in the way they huddle behind barriers, in the tremor in their hands, in the way they look over their shoulders like they don't know if the next moment will be their last. Tom Hanks, already a veteran of emotionally intense roles, said it was the most demanding shoot of his career. Not because of the dialogue, but because of the atmosphere. It was emotionally exhausting, he admitted. Every day we went home covered in dirt and blood and felt like we'd actually been through something. The entire cast felt the same. Matt Damon, who played Private Ryan, wasn't put through the same boot camp, and that was deliberate. Spielberg wanted the other actors to resent him a little, to feel the tension of having suffered for a mission that revolved around a stranger. It was a subtle psychological trick, and it worked. Composer John Williams also approached the film with uncharacteristic restraint. His score, while beautiful, remains almost entirely absent during combat. Williams knew that no musical cue could match the raw horror of what Spielberg had captured. Instead, the music only rises in moments of reflection. After the battle, in moments of grief, or at the very end, when the weight of sacrifice comes full circle. His compositions are reverent, mournful, and dignified. They don't guide emotion, they echo it. The post-production process was just as intense. Spielberg edited quickly with a sense of urgency, while the emotion of the shoot was still fresh. He was known to break down in the editing room, reliving moments as if they were real memories. It wasn't just about crafting a story. It was about honoring something bigger than cinema, something sacred. The film's release on July 24, 1998, was met with stunned silence. Audiences didn't clap. They sat in their seats, unable to speak. Veterans came forward, many in tears, some needing to step outside during the Omaha beach sequence. Critics hailed it as a technical triumph, but more importantly, as a moral reckoning. Spielberg hadn't just made a war movie. He'd created a kind of cinematic testimony. Saving Private Ryan went on to win 5 Academy Awards, including Best Director, Best Cinematography, and Best Sound. But the impact of the film went beyond statues. It changed the way war movies were made. Films like Black Hawk Down, The Hurt Locker, 1917, and the series Band of Brothers, which Spielberg and Hanks would co-produce, all borrowed its techniques, its aesthetics, and its ethical compass. The handheld camera work, the muted color grading, the emphasis on soldier psychology, those weren't just stylistic choices anymore. They became the standard. But Spielberg wasn't chasing influence. He was chasing truth. And through the sheer force of creative will, he and his team redefined what cinematic truth could look like. They turned film into memory, light into legacy, and with every grain of sand, every frame of blood-soaked celluloid, they made sure we would never forget. There's a quiet moment near the end of Saving Private Ryan, as the camera lingers on the face of an old man standing at a grave in Normandy. His eyes filled with tears not just for the fallen, but for the weight of a lifetime spent carrying the question, was I worth it? It's not just a question that Private James Ryan asks. It's the question the film leaves echoing in the hearts of every viewer. And in that haunting, delicate moment, Spielberg's war epic becomes something more than a movie. It becomes a meditation on duty, sacrifice, morality, and the staggering cost of human life. Beneath the bullets and the blood, the film whispers timeless themes. Chief among them is the burden of survival, the guilt that clings to those who make it out alive. Ryan, whose life becomes the mission, carries the invisible weight of the men who died for him. Captain Miller's last words, "Earn this," become a spiritual commandment. They're not about paying someone back in kind. They're about living a life that justifies the ultimate sacrifice. It's not glory that Saving Private Ryan honors. It's responsibility, the moral debt that comes with someone else dying in your place. Throughout the film, the contrast between individual lives and the machinery of war is unrelenting. A single family loses 3 sons. A telegram changes a mother's life forever. Yet war, in its brutal calculus, sees only numbers. The very premise of the film, risking lives to save one, is in direct conflict with military logic. But it's that contradiction that gives the story its soul. It asks, when is a life worth more than another? Can human value ever be measured in strategic terms? And Spielberg doesn't answer that question. He lets the characters wrestle with it. Sergeant Horvath, played with quiet gravitas by Tom Sizemore, defends the mission not out of belief, but out of loyalty to Miller. Private Ryan challenges it, seeing the hypocrisy of sacrificing many for one. Their debate isn't academic. It's visceral. It unfolds under fire, with lives at stake. And that tension becomes the emotional thread pulling the audience through every decision, every death. Symbolism flows like an undercurrent beneath every frame. The opening and closing shots, bookends at the Normandy cemetery, tie the past to the present. The American flag, faded and translucent in the first shot, is a stark reminder that patriotism can fade into ritual if not grounded in meaning. That flag isn't triumphant. It's ghostly. Spielberg isn't questioning national pride, but urging reflection. What does it mean to honor the fallen? Is it ceremony, or is it empathy? Captain Miller's trembling hand is another subtle motif. It surfaces repeatedly, an unspoken symptom of the trauma he carries. It's never explained aloud. Spielberg trusts us to understand. Miller, a high school English teacher before the war, is not hardened by combat. He's eroded by it. The hand tremor isn't weakness. It's humanity clawing its way to the surface. The closer he comes to violence, the more his body reminds him of the man he used to be. It's a physical manifestation of moral dissonance. Even the environment becomes symbolic. The terrain they cross, muddy fields, crumbled churches, hollowed-out towns, reflects the inner ruin of the characters. Nature and civilization are both scarred, just like the men. And in one especially haunting moment, rain falls on blood-soaked soil, washing nothing away. It's as if the earth itself refuses to forget. The film's use of silence is as potent as its sound. After the Omaha beach landing, there's a lull, a deadly quiet filled only with waves and shallow breathing. In that silence lies judgment, grief, shock. The absence of music, the refusal to cut away to safety, forces the viewer to sit in the aftermath, to mourn, to reflect. Spielberg knew that showing death wasn't enough. He needed us to feel the void it left behind. A recurring theme is the idea of identity in war. Who you were before the bullets started flying doesn't matter, unless it does. Captain Miller keeps his pre-war life a secret for most of the film, holding onto it like a totem. When he finally shares that he was a schoolteacher, it doesn't just humanize him. It recontextualizes every decision he's made. It shows us the man beneath the rank, the teacher trying to make sense of a world that stopped making sense. Private Mellish, the Jewish soldier, carries more than a rifle, he carries history. When he shows a Star of David to a captured German soldier, it's not just an act of defiance. It's a silent scream across generations. In that moment, Spielberg subtly acknowledges the Holocaust, not through exposition, but through gesture. That star represents identity, persecution, resistance. It speaks volumes without a single word. One of the most powerful symbolic moments comes at the cost of Wade, the medic. His death is slow, agonizing, and surrounded by men powerless to save him. It's the inversion of the mission itself, a man dying while others can only watch. His last cries are for his mother. It's raw, intimate, primal, and it tears through the pretense of war as noble or glorious. Here, Spielberg strips everything away. Wade isn't a soldier anymore. He's a boy dying far from home, longing for comfort. That moment, like so many in the film, reminds us that behind every casualty statistic is a name, a family, a life. The German soldier known as Steamboat Willie serves as another complex moral symbol. Captured and then released by Miller's unit, he later reappears in the final battle, possibly responsible for Miller's death. His presence challenges the morality of mercy. Should they have executed him? Was compassion a mistake in war? The film doesn't give easy answers. Instead, it forces us to confront the consequences of our values when they collide with survival. Beyond the battlefield, Saving Private Ryan holds a mirror to contemporary society. Released in 1998, it arrived in a world distanced from the Second World War by half a century. Yet its messages were as urgent as ever. Spielberg, with post-Vietnam and post-Cold War awareness, wasn't just honoring the greatest generation. He was reasserting the value of empathy in a cynical age. The film doesn't glorify war. It exposes it. And by doing so, it reminds newer generations of the sacrifices that shaped their freedoms. The deeper commentary also touches on the weight of legacy. The final scene, with an aging Ryan asking his wife, "Tell me I've led a good life," isn't about pride. It's about accountability. The older we get, the more we wonder if we've earned the space we occupy. For Ryan, that question is magnified by the blood that bought his future. But for all of us, it lingers. Are we making good on the opportunities handed down by others' pain? The concept of sacrifice without recognition runs parallel to this. Countless soldiers in the film die nameless, their stories untold. Captain Miller, despite his heroic command, is buried beneath a simple white cross. No fanfare, no monument, just silence. Spielberg reminds us that heroism is often quiet, anonymous, and that history is built not just on the famous but on the forgotten. And through all of it, the moral ambiguity of war is ever present. Not every American soldier is noble. Not every enemy is monstrous. Spielberg avoids binary portrayals. The choices made are human, flawed, and desperate. The line between right and wrong blurs in the smoke of battle. War doesn't grant moral clarity. It demands it and punishes hesitation. The bridge in Rommel, the film's final stand, is more than a tactical objective. It becomes a metaphor for crossing into legacy, for making a stand that will ripple through time. It's where Miller dies, where Ryan lives, where ideals are tested, and where history cements its verdict. And yet, amidst the devastation, the film plants seeds of hope. The very act of saving Ryan is a defiance against war's dehumanizing force. It's an affirmation that even one life, one farmer's son from Iowa, can be worth saving. That decency, in its smallest form, can survive even in the crucible of war. Saving Private Ryan doesn't give us answers wrapped in ribbons. It gives us questions etched in shrapnel. Questions about how we remember, how we honor, how we live. Its themes don't sit apart from the story. They rise from it, like ghosts from the battlefield, asking us to look closer, to feel deeper. And in the end, when Ryan stands before the grave of the man who gave everything for him, he's not just speaking for himself. He's speaking for us all, asking if we've lived lives that were worthy, if we've earned the gifts of peace and freedom, and if, somehow, in all our imperfection, we've remembered what they gave so we could live. From the very first frames of Saving Private Ryan, Spielberg's directorial vision grips you, not just with the content of the story, but with how it's told. It doesn't feel like a film made in 1998. It feels like a memory, worn at the edges, soaked in grit, fear, and blood. That's because every stylistic decision, every shot, sound, and silence, is crafted not for spectacle, but for immersion. The film doesn't want you to watch war. It wants you to feel trapped inside it. The visual language Spielberg uses is immediate and confrontational. It begins with that now iconic sequence on Omaha Beach. The handheld camera, jittery, almost panicked, doesn't guide the viewer. It follows, stumbles, falls. The lens is at eye level, often smeared with blood, water, and dirt, mirroring the chaos the soldiers face. Cinematographer Janusz Kaminski and Spielberg made a deliberate choice to remove the clean, composed distance that defines traditional war films and instead mimic the rawness of actual combat footage. This choice makes the viewer feel embedded with the soldiers, dodging bullets, gasping for breath, and struggling to survive. The desaturation of the color palette plays a crucial role in this. The film isn't black and white, but it's drained of warmth. Greens are muted, blues are cold, and flesh tones are pallid. Spielberg and Kaminski even experimented with bleach bypass processing to give the visuals a high-contrast, gritty texture. This stripped-back palette doesn't just serve realism. It echoes the emotional barrenness of war. Life in this world has had its color bled out. The editing style reinforces that emotional realism. Michael Kahn, Spielberg's longtime editor, cuts the action with a brutal rhythm. There's no grace, no Hollywood polish. Transitions are jagged, sudden. Scenes of violence erupt without warning, and often end just as abruptly, leaving the viewer as shell-shocked as the characters. Time doesn't stretch for drama, it fractures under pressure. One moment you're breathing, the next, a mortar hits, and everything goes white. And yet, within that chaos, Spielberg maintains clarity. The geography of battle is always understandable. It's not about losing the audience in the action. It's about immersing them in a believable nightmare. Every edit is purposeful. Every moment of stillness, whether it's a trembling hand or a soldier scanning the horizon, is given room to breathe just enough before the next thunderous moment slams into it. The use of sound design is just as vital in creating the film's atmosphere. The whine of bullets, the dull thud of explosions underwater, the high-pitched ring that often follows blasts. Each sound element is chosen to simulate actual sensory overload. Sound editor Gary Ridstrom didn't just capture the noise of war. He captured the way it disorients, isolates, and traumatizes. When a soldier is stunned by a shell, we hear what he hears. Muffled cries, ringing, distant echoes. That auditory chaos makes the viewer feel as unmoored as the character. And then, just as suddenly, the world snaps back into clarity, often with a scream or a gunshot. John Williams's score, usually so front and center in Spielberg's work, is used with stark restraint here. There's no sweeping orchestration during the battles. No musical cues guiding the audience's emotions through the gunfire. Instead, the music waits. It observes. And when it arrives, like during the cemetery scenes or the final moments of reflection, it comes in like a quiet prayer, not a patriotic anthem. The main theme is mournful, reverent, aching. Williams isn't scoring heroism. He's scoring loss, regret, memory. Perhaps one of the most haunting uses of sound comes when there isn't any. Silence is wielded like a weapon throughout the film. After the storm of battle, Spielberg lets the silence fall heavy. In those quiet moments, amid the smoking ruins and lifeless bodies, the emotional weight hits hardest. It's in that quiet that the horror lingers. The silence isn't peace. It's aftermath. Spielberg's use of point-of-view framing also heightens the intimacy of the narrative. Whether it's through Captain Miller's disoriented eyes as he surveys the carnage on the beach, or through the close-ups of frightened young soldiers on the verge of tears, the audience is constantly pulled into personal spaces. The war isn't a distant event. It's happening inches from your face. Blood spatters the lens. Hands reach out. Eyes lock with the camera. There's no safety in the audience seat. A recurring visual motif is the contrast between stillness and motion. During moments of battle, everything moves. Bullets, smoke, debris, bodies. But Spielberg often freezes the world with a look. Miller watching a soldier burn. A young man frozen in fear while his comrade dies beside him. These moments of arrested motion force the audience to pause and take in the individual tragedy within the broader chaos. Spielberg reminds us that behind every fallen figure is a story cut short. The framing and composition throughout the film are meticulously considered. Spielberg and Kaminsky often shoot from low angles, placing the viewer below the soldiers not to elevate them, but to place us in the mud with them. High-angle shots, when used, usually depict bodies strewn across beaches or fields, stripping them of identity. It's a reversal of traditional heroic cinematography. These aren't gods of war, they're fragile, exhausted men. One of the most chilling sequences is the death of Private Mellish. The camera doesn't flinch. It stays, agonizingly, as he's stabbed to death in brutal silence. The scene plays out slowly, cruelly. The close-up captures every breath, every whisper. There's no dramatic score, no cutaway, just two men locked in a fatal struggle and a third soldier, Upham, paralyzed by fear outside the door. It's one of the most viscerally upsetting moments in the film, not because of gore, but because of how real it feels. It's filmed like a documentary, unblinking, honest, devastating. Lighting is another subtle but powerful tool. Daylight in the film is rarely warm. It's overcast, hazy, sometimes blinding. Night scenes are bathed in shadow and firelight, flickering with instability. There's no comfort in light or dark, only different shades of fear. The climactic battle in Rommel is lit with muzzle flashes and explosions, painting the town in erratic bursts of fire. It's not just chaotic, it's apocalyptic. Civilization turned to rubble, lit by the flames of its own destruction. Spielberg also uses visual callbacks to great effect. The film begins and ends in the same cemetery, with the same American flag waving above. The final shot, where the flag is once again translucent and faded, mirrors the opening, bringing the story full circle. Not just narratively, but thematically. It suggests that memory itself is fragile, that time erodes everything, monuments, memories, even patriotism, unless actively remembered. Throughout the film, Spielberg's visual storytelling never indulges in romanticism. There are no slow-motion hero shots, no triumphant poses. Even when characters display bravery, it's messy, frantic, desperate. When Captain Miller makes his final stand on the bridge, firing a pistol at a tank with shaking hands, it's not triumphant. It's tragic. The absurdity of it underscores the film's core message. War is not glorious. It's cruel, arbitrary, and often futile. And yet, within that darkness, Spielberg finds beauty. Not in the violence, but in the resilience. In the silent courage of men who keep moving forward. In the moments of quiet connection between soldiers. A shared cigarette. A letter home. A story about a lost brother. These human touches are filmed with tenderness. A soft focus. A gentle camera move. A lingering frame. The same eye that captures horror also captures humanity. Ultimately, Saving Private Ryan redefined how war films are made. Its influence is everywhere, from Band of Brothers to 1917. But what sets it apart isn't just technical brilliance. It's emotional honesty. Spielberg doesn't want you to marvel at his craft. He wants you to confront what war takes. Not just lives, but innocence, hope, and sometimes even meaning. Every cinematic technique, from the grain of the film stock to the placement of a footstep, is in service of that truth. By the time the film ends and the music gently swells, and we see the American flag one last time, we're not left with a sense of victory. We're left with questions. Questions about memory, about sacrifice, about how we choose to honor those who gave everything. And maybe, just maybe, about whether we, too, have earned it. As the final echoes of gunfire fade and the dust settles over the ruins of Rommel, Saving Private Ryan does something remarkable. It doesn't close with triumph, but with memory. And it's that act of remembering, of asking what sacrifice means and who must carry its weight, that elevates the film into something far greater than a war story. It becomes a cultural reckoning, a mirror held up to history, a question asked of generations that follow. Few films have lingered in the collective conscience quite like this one, because few have dared to capture not just what war looks like, but what it feels like. When the film was released on July 24, 1998, it didn't just arrive, it detonated. It redefined the war genre with such force that the medium itself bent around it. Audiences walked into theaters expecting a traditional Spielberg epic. What they experienced instead was something closer to a cinematic wound. The opening 24-minute Omaha beach landing scene stunned critics and viewers alike, not for its spectacle, but for its stark, unfiltered realism. People were shaken, silent, shell-shocked. Veterans reportedly walked out of the theater in tears. Some needed therapy. Others finally opened up about their experiences for the first time in decades. The impact was visceral, immediate, and undeniable. It was a film that didn't seek to comfort. Confronted. The kind of filmmaking that made other war movies suddenly seem sanitized by comparison. And that comparison wasn't just happening among audiences. It sent tremors through the film industry itself. Directors and cinematographers began rethinking how to portray violence, trauma, and authenticity. The desaturated palette, shaky handheld camera work, and documentary-style editing that Spielberg pioneered in Saving Private Ryan became the new cinematic language of modern war. The ripple effects were massive. HBO's Band of Brothers, which Spielberg and Tom Hanks would go on to produce, built directly upon the film's aesthetic and emotional DNA. War video games like Medal of Honor and Call of Duty lifted entire sequences straight from the film's visual and auditory playbook. Suddenly, realism wasn't just an artistic choice, it became the standard. War stories had to earn their stripes, and that meant facing the noise, the blood, and the deafening silence that followed. But Saving Private Ryan didn't just reshape how war was portrayed, it reshaped what war meant to moviegoers. It forced a reckoning with the idea of sacrifice. The film's moral center isn't found in explosions or battles. It's found in Captain Miller's haunting last words, "Earn this." That final plea to Private Ryan isn't just a character's dying wish. It's a message sent forward in time, aimed directly at the audience. What are we doing with the lives that others gave everything for? How do we honor that kind of sacrifice? It's not a rhetorical flourish. It's a burden. That emotional weight is what has kept the film relevant for over 2 decades. In classrooms, it's studied not just for its technical craft, but for its portrayal of ethics, leadership, and humanity. In military institutions, it's used as a case study in courage and command. And in living rooms around the world, it still brings viewers to tears. The film's legacy is carved into hearts, not just history books. Awards quickly followed. The film was nominated for 11 Academy Awards and won 5, including Best Director for Spielberg, Best Cinematography for Janusz Kaminski, and Best Editing for Michael Kahn. Many believed it should have won Best Picture as well, and to this day, its loss to Shakespeare in Love remains one of the Academy's most debated decisions. But Oscars or not, the cultural scoreboard told a different story. Saving Private Ryan became a landmark, a film so towering in influence that it didn't need the industry's ultimate prize to validate its significance. Time would do that. In 2014, the Library of Congress selected the film for preservation in the National Film Registry, citing its cultural, historical, and aesthetic importance. And rightly so, because it doesn't just tell the story of World War II. Preserves its emotional truth, captures the fear, the camaraderie, the chaos, and most importantly, the loss. It's not just soldiers who are affected by this film. It's families, the students. It's people who've never set foot on a battlefield, but who feel the chill of war settle over them as the screen fades to black. Spielberg made a film that transcends demographics and decades. Its story may be set in 1944, but its questions are timeless. What do we owe to those who came before us? How do we live lives worthy of their sacrifice? And then there's Tom Hanks, whose performance as Captain John Miller became iconic almost overnight. His portrayal of a quiet, reluctant leader, a schoolteacher turned soldier, embodied the ordinary man asked to do extraordinary things. It was a masterclass in subtlety, not a performance that screamed for attention, but one that carried the entire emotional weight of the film on trembling shoulders. His shaking hand, his measured voice, his breaking point, these became etched in the memory of viewers as deeply as any battle scene. But the legacy of Saving Private Ryan isn't just about what happens on screen. It's about what happened after. Spielberg, affected by the response from veterans and families, became even more involved in historical preservation. The film sparked conversations around PTSD, survivor's guilt, and the psychological scars of combat in ways few films had before. It created a space for veterans to be seen, not as abstractions of heroism, but as human beings. It also inspired a reevaluation of the World War II generation, now often referred to as the greatest generation. The film's depiction of selflessness, camaraderie, and moral ambiguity resonated in a world growing increasingly skeptical of clear-cut heroes. Saving Private Ryan reminded us that heroism isn't clean. It's not a medal or a speech. It's a decision. Sometimes it's just one man choosing to keep going, even when every muscle in his body tells him to stop. And culturally, the film's footprint is enormous. References to its scenes have appeared in everything from dramas to parodies. Its visual style has been mimicked, its score sampled, its narrative structure echoed. The idea of a group of soldiers sent on a deeply personal mission in the middle of a massive war became a blueprint for everything from Furito Dunkirk to video games and graphic novels. Even in unrelated genres, the DNA of Saving Private Ryan can be traced. Anytime a filmmaker wants to show the human cost of violence, they're walking in Spielberg's footsteps. But perhaps its greatest legacy lies in its refusal to glorify. Spielberg doesn't offer answers, he offers memory. He doesn't bathe his soldiers in patriotic glory. He shows their fear, their doubt, their despair. And in doing so, he gives them honor, not through mythology, but through honesty. At the heart of it all is a single grave. An old man standing before it, his family in the background, his lips trembling as he asks if he lived a good life. That moment isn't just the end of a movie. It's a call to all of us. A reminder that history is made by ordinary people asked to carry impossible burdens. And that remembering their story is, in itself, an act of reverence. So Saving Private Ryan endures, not because it dazzles, but because it haunts. Because every time that flag flutters in the breeze, every time that beach sand turns red, every time a soldier reaches for a letter home, we're reminded of what was lost, what was given, and what we, the living, must now earn. From the thunderous chaos of Omaha Beach to the quiet, tear-streaked reflection in a Normandy graveyard, Saving Private Ryan remains one of the most powerful experiences cinema has ever given us. It's not just a war film. It's a meditation on sacrifice, brotherhood, duty, and the fragile thread of humanity stretched across the violence of history. Everything about it, from Spielberg's uncompromising direction to the raw, trembling performances of its cast, tells a story that refuses to fade with time. What makes this film stand out, even decades later, is its brutal honesty. There's no glamour in the war it shows us, no glorified heroism, just men doing their best to hold onto their souls amid the unrelenting noise of death. Every gunshot, every muddy step, every breath feels earned, deliberate, and soaked in meaning. The camera doesn't blink, it stays and it watches, and in doing so, it dares us to feel what they feel, to understand, even in the smallest way, what was asked of them. At the center of this harrowing journey is Captain John Miller, played by Tom Hanks with a restraint that makes his performance unforgettable. His mission to find and return Private James Francis Ryan is both literal and symbolic. It's about saving a life, yes, but it's also about preserving a sliver of hope in a world coming apart. As the story unfolds, we meet a squad of soldiers who carry their own burdens, each one a portrait of fear, anger, humor, and heart. They're not superheroes. They're not infallible. They're tired, scared, and deeply human. That humanity is what anchors Saving Private Ryan in the hearts of audiences. When Wade cries out for his mother, when Jackson prays as he snipes from the tower, when Mellish fights hand-to-hand in a suffocating stairwell, we're not just witnessing war. We're feeling its cost. Every loss stings. Every choice weighs heavy. And when Captain Miller's hand shakes or his voice breaks, it echoes in us too. The film's visual and technical achievements cannot be overstated. Janusz Kaminski's cinematography throws us into the mud and blood with handheld chaos, desaturated tones, and disorienting realism. Michael Kahn's editing cuts like shrapnel, giving us no time to breathe when it matters most. And John Williams, with his restrained and haunting score, avoids sweeping fanfare in favor of quiet reverence. Together, they form a tapestry of sound and image that doesn't tell us how to feel, but forces us to confront what's already inside. Yet for all its cinematic craftsmanship, what truly elevates Saving Private Ryan is the legacy it leaves behind. Its influence is everywhere, from the revival of gritty historical dramas to the way modern war films now strive for authenticity and emotional depth. It opened the door for stories like Band of Brothers, 1917, The Pacific, and countless others that chose to honor the truth rather than rewrite it. More than that, it changed how we view those who served. It helped humanize a generation often spoken of in terms of statistics and headlines. It gave a face to sacrifice, a name to every cross in every military cemetery. And it made us ask questions we're still grappling with today. What does it mean to be brave? To follow orders? To question them? To survive? The thematic weight of the film reaches far beyond the screen. It's about memory, collective and personal. About legacy. About what we owe to those who came before. Spielberg doesn't offer us closure. He offers a challenge. And in those final moments, as an older James Ryan stands at the grave of the man who gave his life for him, we're all pulled into that question. Did I live a good life? It's not just Ryan asking. It's all of us. This isn't a story that ends neatly. It lingers, in a shaking hand, in a graveyard bathed in light, in the flicker of an American flag caught in the breeze. It's a film that demands more than just attention. It demands reflection. And in that reflection, we discover why it's endured for so long, why it still moves people to tears, why it still sparks debate, why it still teaches and stirs and speaks. Because Saving Private Ryan is more than a film. It's a memory passed down, a tribute etched in celluloid, promise that we will not forget, and that, perhaps, is its greatest power, not just in showing us the cost of freedom, but in making sure we never take it for granted. So, if this journey through the fire and fog of war stirred something in you, if you saw the movie in a new light, or remembered why it matters, then here's what you can do next. If you love this breakdown, give the video a thumbs up and subscribe for more deep dives into the world of cinema. Let's keep exploring movies together, because there are so many more stories to tell, so many more hidden layers to uncover, and so many unforgettable moments waiting in the dark, ready to be seen again, this time with new eyes.